This universe that we live in is always unfolding a dynamic life that is attuned to you, specifically to you. And that unfoldment always involves change. Some change that we welcome, like promotions at work, or a new relationship, or maybe a child into your life. But sometimes those changes don't feel welcome. They can even feel like life is punishing you, like when we lose a job, or when our house is destroyed in some kind of disaster, or the death of a child, the death of a loved one. And when those things happen, it can be hard to remember that everything that's happening in our life is inviting us to grow and to develop, to discover more and more about our potential as a human being, as a spiritual human being, to come in to the fullness of what it means to be alive and to be an expression of spirit. When those things, particularly those things that seem much bigger than I perceive myself to be, or those things that are very hard come up for me, it's easy for me to want to push back and say, no, that's not for me. And as I step into them, and it's because sometimes I don't have any choice whether I'm going to step into them, I often can feel like I can't do it. It brings up deficiency in me, and I want to just pull back. I want to pull back into that life that felt so familiar, so comfortable to me. And in the 17 years that I got to teach here, had the privilege of teaching here, I most often blamed that on our ego. Because you see, the ego, by its nature, is trying to protect us. It wants to control our life. It wants us to live a small life that it can control. And so it's always telling us what we can and can't do. And often what we can't do in a very loud voice, from its opinion of what we can and can't do. But just recently, I have learned that there's more to the story. And I've been so excited to share it with you because it's really helped me take another step forward in my own spiritual journey. In Unity, we tend to focus on two aspects of spiritual growth. One is these limiting beliefs that become patterned in us. We call that the ego. Those beliefs, we come into our spiritual work often very identified. Here's who I am. This is what I can and can't do. This is what I like and don't like. It defines us. And it is a very powerful structure in us that we go along with in our lives. But then we start into the work and we have the opportunity to begin to explore those beliefs, to understand and feel the feelings that made us connect with those beliefs so strongly, be so attached, even at some of us at our older age, still clinging to those beliefs. It feels like they're our survival. But as we see them, understand where they came from, we begin to become less identified with them. We loosen the hold on them. And what happens in our soul is that the ego is really a very small part, but very active part of our soul. We're able to move out of that structure and experience the spacious, quiet stillness of our soul, a space that really invites spirit, and spirit in all its many different forms to come forward. The other leg then is getting to know spirit. The other aspect that we teach. We talk to you about the 12 powers. We encourage you to meditate so that you can develop your capacity for being in the stillness, in the quiet, so that you can learn to concentrate, so that you find there's something other than the constant chatter of ego in your mind, the still small voice. And you come to hear the guidance that is always present in our lives. But today, I want to talk to you about making it into a 3-legged stool instead of this 2 legs that we usually hang on. Because we don't talk about, at least I, in 17 years here, I don't think ever talked about the fact that the soul needs to be developed in order for us to have the capacity not only to hold spirit as it moves into our lives, as it inspires us, but also to develop the many different skills and qualities that are potential in us. Because you see, our soul is always able to grow and develop. It never hardens like the ego. The soul is malleable, it's impactable, even when we are in our hundreds, we still have the capacity to grow. Growth, the growth of our soul, the tone of it is often set in our childhood. When we grew up in a family that was, mirrored, because we learn a lot as a kid from mirroring. We learn to walk, we learn to talk, we learn how to relate through mirroring. So many things. But also, if we grew up in a family that was willing to mirror what they saw coming forth in us, and if you grew up when I did, it was often mirroring what they wanted to come forth in you, not necessarily what was coming forth, right? And so those things, though, that were real for you, that came forward, we tended to develop. When we hear positive feedback about something, even as adults, we tend to move in that direction. Unfortunately, there are other areas of our soul that weren't mirrored for us. And so those we tended to ignore. They don't develop as much. And so I want to talk to you about 2 different levels of development that can happen in our soul that can tend to hold us back, can tend to keep us from claiming the potential, the unlimited potential of our soul, the unlimited potential of our life. So one of those is arrested development. This is the normal experience of the ego. You see, before the ego forms, and it doesn't start forming until age 2, and in women it stops, sort of solidifies, done at around age 18. As typical, it takes longer for us men, more like 21 or 22. I know some men where it's questionable if it's done yet. So we have time to have things develop, capacities to grow. And then what happens is, because of something, and I'm going to give you an example in a minute, because of something that happens in our life, we don't trust that development, and we feel that it needs to be changed or shut down. So that becomes arrested. It forms into a pattern. We take what's happening dynamically and we make it into something safe. We say, okay, this is what I'm going to do from now on. And it arrests our development. It stops it. And it can have quite an impact on us. There are times when, even in our adult age, when something comes up, we feel like a child. Like we feel like our happiness can only go to the extent of a child, or our pleasure, or our ability to organize our life. It seems like it's just, somehow it's not able to come to what life is asking us for. But when we're willing to investigate that, we're willing to be curious about it, to go in and free it from the ego structure, because there's development there, it grows easily. It develops easily from there. Like, I'll give you an example. So I grew up, and we all have capacities, spiritual capacities too, that are growing. So one of the qualities of spirit in us is clarity. Another is curiosity. And so I was one of those kids that had some ability to put things together as a kid. But what I didn't have was the maturity to know when things could be asked and when things couldn't be asked, right? So most often in my childhood, I heard, "Oh God, let's not talk about that." It was kind of a joke in my family, right? Until one particular evening. A gentleman had come to live with us. He was a friend of my dad's. He'd been there a week. And having been there a week and, hearing different conversations, I realized he was there because his wife had thrown him out. So at dinner that night, I turned to him and said, "So Doug, why do you think your wife asked you to leave?" My dad turned so red, I thought his head was going to blow off. He was so angry at me. And my mother, in this almost screaming high voice, "Oh God, let's not talk about that." And I was about 8 or 9. I had to call my mother the other day. This is an event that is not ever forgotten in my family. To see how old I was. And she said, "You were about 8 or 9. So there was plenty of time for development, right? Of curiosity, spontaneity in me. But after that night, I said, "Oh, it's not safe to just be in the," I didn't have these words, but it's not safe to just be in the flow anymore. I need to stop, think about what I'm going to say, make sure it's safe, and then say it. That's the way we cap off. That's the way we arrest our development. And years ago, I came to realize that. Actually, it was in this congregation. Remember, I used to be very tied to my notes. I used to bring a manuscript up to give my talk. And one day I came up and said, "I feel clearly guided that I'm supposed to give talks without notes." Do you see? The development is happening. I'm in the flow right now, right? It's just happening. This is the potential. Now, when we talk about unlimited potential, I think it's important to say your potential is different than the person sitting next to you, because each of our souls is unique. But these qualities of presence that are God in us, they're available to each and every one of us. It's how our soul is organized that uses it, and how much we've been willing to develop it. That's arrested development, what I just gave you an example of. Now, what's far more challenging, and what I really want to focus on today, is when there is little or no development in an area. This would be something that wasn't modeled to you, or something that was not looked favorably on in your family. So you actually got negative feedback about it and did not ever get to practice it. What we find out about development is our souls develop through practice and repetition. If you know anything about brain sciences, what we're talking about here is neural pathways, that our physicality invites spirit through having pathways that we can respond to the presence that is God, that is spirit moving in us. So it's interesting. The qualities of spirit are the same for each and every one of us. When presence arises as strength, it's the same strength in each and every person on the planet. But our soul's ability to hold that presence as strength determines then how we use it, how it gets expressed in the world. Same thing with our curiosity, our value, our power, our love, the list. Charles Fillmore named 12 powers, but I always like to say, don't let that limit you. The Buddhists have identified 140 different qualities of God that are ready to express as us. And it is because our soul can grow and mature that we have unlimited potential with those. But if something hasn't been allowed to develop in us, and life is pushing up against it, if the unfolding is calling it forth, then we want to work with it. Because if we're not, then we're steering around some potential that is just ripe to come into expression as us. The challenge is that we have a very smart little ego that sets up all sorts of defenses around these areas of lack of development in us. Why? Because it doesn't want us to feel embarrassed. It doesn't want us to be shamed. It doesn't want us, to have to admit that we really don't know what to do or how to do in this area. And then on top of that, all of us have an internal judge, and our judge will feed you messages like, oh, you don't want to try that. You don't know anything about that. You're no good at that. Whatever it is, oh, for sure, don't share that. And so what happens is we don't get to claim that potential. I'll give you an example. So when I was in the Unity Seminary, there was a woman in my seminary class. I didn't know her well at the time, but we both found out that we wanted to go to an event out in the community. I don't remember if it was a concert or a movie or whatever. And so we were going to do it together. And I said, well, why don't you come over for dinner? And we'll have dinner before we go. Great dinner conversation, easy flow. You know how those are. And we got done with dinner in time for us to clean up the kitchen before. And I was learning quickly, I was new in this seminary experience, that without a dishwasher, I wanted to clean up because getting dried stuff off my dishes and pans was no fun. So I said to her, why don't we do the dishes? Her whole countenance shifted amazingly. It was like she withdrew from the room. She is out of the building now. And I said, what's going on? And after a long pause, she said, I have never done dishes. Now, this is a woman that's clearly 10 years older than me, and I was in my early 30s. I thought she was joking. You've never done dishes? And she said, yeah, I grew up in a very wealthy family. Not only have I never done dishes, I have never done laundry, I have never cooked a meal, I have never made my bed. I only know how to drive because the chauffeur gives priority to my dad and my mom. And if I didn't learn to drive, then I wouldn't be able to have independence, autonomy from them. And then she said, and it took her a while to say this, but maybe there's no better time than the present for me to learn how to do dishes. What's interesting about these areas of non-development is if we're willing to work through the defense, if we're curious about why am I so quick to tell people that I can't do that or just saying no around that, what we find is the initial experience will be that you cannot function. So she stepped into the kitchen and I said, why don't you wash and I will dry and put dishes away. She stood in front of the sink and was motionless and finally said, I have no idea what to do. And from that point, I said, well, let me help you. We ran some water until it got, pretty hot, pretty warm. And then we put the stopper in the sink, showed her how to do that, showed her how to add soap, had to show her the motion with a washcloth on how to wash the dishes. She learned on her own that soap makes dishes slippery. Luckily, nothing got broken. But just think about washing dishes. We don't even think about it, right? I could stand up here and wash dishes and give this talk. For her, it was incredibly clunky. You could just see everything she had to move through. She had to concentrate. There was no talking. Don't talk to me. I'm trying to get this down. This is what it's like when we have no development in our soul in an area. And you may be sitting there going, oh, I don't have any of those. Yes, you do. I got to see just a simple little one. And the reason I'm excited to tell you about this is how many times in your life, like think about New Year's resolutions, where you're all fired up about something and you're going to take it on and, I'm going to master this. And 5 days later, you can't even remember that it was a resolution, right? This is how strong the defense can be. So for me, 8 months ago, I decided I wanted to lose some weight. Now, I've lost weight before. It's been a lot of focus. But usually, and then I could kind of go back to the way I always ate because I worked out a lot, I was active, my metabolism was stronger. At 66, shoot, things change. I can't work out like I used to. I play pickleball for an hour and a half. I come home and take a nap. My life is so different now. Well, and not bad, but different. I've had to adjust. So I set out to lose weight. And every morning, I can do this. And about 8 o'clock at night, the resolve starts to disappear, right? Like, I want to raid the refrigerator. I'm like a wild animal wanting to raid the refrigerator. I'm not even sure I'm hungry, right? And so this is where I started learning more about soul development. I realized that there was a huge amount of momentum in my system that I needed to eat. And so I started just exploring it, just like I would if I was exploring a deep-seated belief. And what I found, some of the things I found were my parents never had to focus on food at all, and how much they consumed. And I grew up in one of those families where there was always a lot of food, right? So like when a meal was laid out, you never ran out of food, right? So there was never anyone saying, yeah, you should probably look at how much you eat or whatever. And then my dad, he would either pop this giant, we had the biggest bowl for popcorn. He would either pop this giant bowl of popcorn at night at around 7 or 8, or he would whip out these gallon-sized tubs of ice cream and be getting ice cream ready for all 7 of us. Maybe 6 out of 7 nights. For me, it became comforting. It was a way of numbing out. My childhood was a bit intense, growing up gay, getting teased, and even my dad wanting to be someone different than I was. I just loved numbing out and all that food. And so what I learned was, while I have good will, strong will in many areas of my life, not like willful, like the ego, but I have access to sticking with something. Will is our ability to stick with something. I found I had none when it came to food. And that it really hit me at night when I, felt alone. Alone. And wanting to comfort myself. Turned out to be super helpful. I read that it's important to acknowledge your creative ideas and your progress around what you're trying to develop. So I started, instead of waiting to see if I lost a pound, I started measuring quarters of a pound, just so I could celebrate my progress. I read books about what we should be eating in our 60s, and read about balancing out protein throughout the day, and how protein should be used instead of carbs when it gets down to night, and making sure you drank enough liquids because that can help you feel more full, and my weight started coming down. But even last night, I was paying attention because I knew I was speaking here today. Even last night at 8 o'clock, I wanted to bite the door off my refrigerator, right? And it's been 8 months. It's been 8 months of me working this every day, just to show you. I know that my will has gotten stronger, but it's not where my will is in other areas. It is a slow process, a developmental process. And I loved it. In one article I read, the author said, you really have to understand it takes a long time to develop neural pathways in our brain. Think about if you're on a spiritual path. I love that he gave this example. They encourage you to meditate every day. Why? Because it takes a long time to develop the pathways that allow you to relax your mind, that allow you to concentrate on something other than the chatter of the ego. And I thought, yeah, I've been meditating since age 14, and I still can have days where I am plagued. And so we have to be, gentle and compassionate with ourselves in these areas. But the trade-off is, when we're living our potential, life is great. There is a certain fulfillment in our life. There's a satisfaction in being who you are. You get up in the morning with a certain degree of excitement about, wow, I'm doing it. When we avoid these areas of little or no development, then we're steering around. And what that means is we're missing out. We're going to end up living a life that feels kind of familiar, not fresh, not new. Oh yeah, here I am again, today. Ho hum. And so it's really worth the potential to add 3 legs, add 3 legs, to consider 3 legs when we're looking at our spirituality. To always be looking at what are the deep-seated beliefs that I have now internalized and become identified with that tell me who and what I am, instead of being an unlimited child of God. 2, what is Spirit in me? And how many of the different ways that Spirit manifests in me have I been able to really embrace? And how is Spirit showing up today? And then 3, where is my life knocking up against areas that I lack development, where my soul needs to be developed? And instead of beating yourself up and saying, I can't, I don't know, I guess I'm just one of those people that's always going to be fat. No. I need to be conscious of the fact that maybe there's something that needs to be developed. Is that it? Seems like it is. Namaste.